come to the university unprepared in mathematics to try to get up to speed. And so we are looking at a variety of different things. We are looking at personalized plans to just address the weaknesses instead of sending them through classes multiple times. We're looking at different strategies for classes, flipping the classroom, modified versions of that versus traditional lecture. And so we're going through kind of a pilot year of different methods to hopefully help our students in the future. And so Jessica has been a great part of this. She's been very willing to use her classes as labs, if you will, to experiment with which methods work the best. And I'm very proud of the work she's done and very pleased to introduce her.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Case. As you said, my name is Jessica Morgan. And as you can see, basically the title of our research is Teaching Methods for MS 100 Intermediate Algebra. Basically a brief summary of the project is the main purpose was to examine if MS 100 students, if their test scores and their homework scores were actually different between the different teaching methods that I use. And the two different teaching methods was a traditional classroom lecture and a semi-flip classroom. Now, traditional classroom lecture is basically just where the instructor lectures the entire class time. Students take notes, they go home, and then they do the homework on their own. And then the semi-flip classroom is basically where prior to class students watch videos which have step-by-step example problems, and they also have access to PowerPoint lectures and the instructor, which would have been my handwritten detailed solutions to classroom examples. The same classroom examples, if they had came to a traditional classroom, they would have saw worked on the board. Those are just written out, very detailed, more detailed than really what they would have seen in class, because obviously, as everyone knows, you can't take the time to write everything on the board. So that's all handed to them. All of it was accessed through Blackboard or through their online book that come with their WebAssign, which is an online homework program that we use during the course. I taught the first two courses last spring in 2013. And with those two courses, I used the traditional classroom lecture, and then in the fall, I used the semi-flip classroom lecture, in basically 2 courses of each. Possible bias in this study, basically only 29 or less students for each course were selected, and then as I said before, only 2 courses were taught using each teaching method each semester. And then students were not selected randomly, they were the students that signed up for my course. So. First we're going to look at, there were 4 tests given during the semester. We're going to look at each of those tests as far as the average of their score and to see if there was a difference between the different teaching methods. There was 4 tests, a final exam, and then also the homework scores we'll be looking at. So first here we have test 1, we have a box plot. And as you can see, it looks as though the traditional classroom lecture was, the mean score was just a tad higher than the semi-flip classroom. When we look at the output for Minitab, we can see that basically what we're going to look at here is the p-value here. For a 2-sample t-test, basically you have the null hypothesis that we want to assume initially that there is no difference. And so once we look at the output and we see that the p-value, what it is, if it is less than 0.05, then we can basically reject our null hypothesis and determine that there is significant, strong enough evidence that there is a significant difference between the 2. But for test 1, as you can see, the p-value is actually 0.297. So since it is greater than 0.05, then we cannot reject the null hypothesis. And we just conclude that there's not strong enough evidence and to say that there is a difference in test 1 between the 2 different teaching methods. And then next we have test 2. For the box plot, as you can see, the semi-flip classroom, the mean for the test 2 is actually higher, quite a bit higher than the traditional. We do have a few outliers, so of course that's going to mess with the mean there. So, but we look at the output for Minitab, Again, the null hypothesis initially is that there is no difference. And then when we look at our p-value, for this output we have 0.004, which is obviously less than 0.05. We're using 0.05 because we have a 95% confidence interval. So it has to be less than 0.5% for us to reject our null. So since it is less than 0.05, we do reject the null hypothesis, and we conclude that there is strong enough evidence that there is a significant difference between the mean test 2 scores between the two teaching methods. Test 3 looks similar. The semi-flipped classroom looks as though it's higher than the traditional. The output from any tab, again we're looking at the p-value. Here we see that it's 0.005, which is less than 0.05. So again, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is evidence that there is a difference between the mean of the scores between the teaching methods. Test 4, here we have a box plot. And as you can see, the semi-flipped classroom still appears as though it's higher. And then the output from any tab. Here the p-value is 0.003, which is less than 0.05. So again, we can reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a difference. Here's the box plot for the final exam. Test 1 through 4 actually out of 150 points. The final exam is 250. We'll look at the output. The p-value is actually 0.000 here, so it's very low. So again, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a difference. Here's the homework scores for WebAssign. WebAssign is the name of the online homework program that we use. Again, it seems as though the semi-flipped classroom is higher. We look at the output. Again, the p-value is 0.000, and very low. And since it is less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is a difference. So in conclusion, all we can say is that there is strong enough evidence to say that there is a difference between the mean test 2, test 3, test 4, the final exam, and the WebAssign homework scores between the two different teaching methods. For further research, this semester I'm actually teaching 2 more MS 100 courses, but this time I'm actually using a true flip classroom teaching method. I may not have went into all the details with the semi-flip. Basically, prior to class, they look over everything, and then in class with the semi-flip, I do a brief lecture, just 10 or 15 minutes, and then they spend the rest of the class meeting by finishing their homework so that I am actually helping them one-on-one. It's a more personalized guidance and interaction with the students, with the instructor. If they don't finish the homework in class, that's fine, they can finish it outside of class. But it allows them to actually be able to work on their homework in class. But with the true flip classroom, which I'm doing now, there is no lecture. Everything is there that when they come in, I actually require them to bring in just 2 or 3 homework problems. Those are taken for a grade. They're not graded on accuracy. It's just the point of whether or not they attempted the problems. And then we talk about those problems and they ask any questions that they have and they continue to work on homework. So basically more time is spent individually with the students. I ask the students if they would like for me to work a certain problem on the board, talk about in detail any other issues. And I found with the semi-flip classroom that basically when students did what they were supposed to do, when I did take the first 10 or 15 minutes to talk about it, they would get very frustrated because if most of them did what they were supposed to do, they were ready for me to show them one-on-one attention and to be able to finish what homework questions they had. So this semester, I actually find that maybe the true flip classroom seems as though the students like it better because they can immediately get my attention one-on-one and be able to finish their homework and get their questions answered very quickly. Basically at the end of the semester, I'll collect the data as far as the test scores from all 4 tests, the final exam and then also from the homework scores. And I will look and see if there is run the statistics and see if there is a difference between the traditional classroom and semi-flipped classroom and then the true flipped classroom teaching methods. Any questions? Yes.
How many students do you have in the total flipped classroom, and do you have sufficient time to get to all the students within a class period?
Yes, there is about, there's less than 30. The courses, I believe, will hold 35, but usually it's 30 or less that end up enrolling. And usually there is time. I do explain to the students on the first day, you have to be patient because I am jumping from student to student. If we did have someone else to help to run it more, because it's basically like a lab, the more help that we would have, the more efficient I think that it would be. But they have been very patient, and it seems as though that I'm able to answer most of the questions, and if not, I still hold office hours to answer those questions. Any other questions? Yes?